Rules with wisdom. At this point in chapter 3 of 1 Kings, David has passed off the scene. He's died, and Solomon has now become the king. It's a sobering thought that we will one day no longer be here, that our children will take over and we will only be a memory. And it's a reality. But such is life. And hopefully we can leave behind a legacy that is worth following. Because we will leave a legacy. It's not a matter if we leave a legacy, we do. It's just what kind will we leave. And I just pray that it will be a good one when we do go over to the other side. So we see David is gone. Solomon is gone. And you look down history, our grandfathers or great-grandfathers are gone. And it's so fast. And before you know it, we're all gone. And then our kids. And then they'll be gone. So if the Lord tarries. So that's just how life goes. But looking at David as Solomon as a king, it seems that he was an unlikely candidate to be king. David perhaps thought that Absalom or some of his other sons would have been a much better candidate, because it seemed that he was very reluctant to put Solomon in position as a king. Because maybe Solomon was too much of an inside boy. It would seem that he was kind of a timid kind of dude that liked to be inside doing dishes with mom. And so he thought, you know what, this guy, we need someone that's a little bit more boyish, outside. But God oftentimes chooses the people that are the unlikeliest. And then he uses them. He changes them for his honor and for his glory. 1 Corinthians says, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things that are mighty. People that God uses greatly oftentimes are very simple people. Billy Graham is one of them. I have never met him, but I have heard people who have, and they said that he is a very simple individual. He's not a complicated person. And so God sometimes or oftentimes uses people like that, or just simple people, but they are available, and then God uses them greatly. And so Solomon has now firmly established his throne. Verse 1, and it says, now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. So David, in his lifetime, he focused on defeating their enemies, and he succeeded. And Solomon now focuses on building the city. He builds the wall all around Jerusalem, and he begins to build a temple, which David already began to accumulate the material to build it. And then he begins to build a palace in his own house. And then he marries Pharaoh's daughter, king of Egypt. Now, it was common back in those days that a king would give each other their daughters as wives. It's a crazy practice, but that's what they did. And their concept or idea why they did it was because they felt that it would promote peace. See, if Pharaoh gives his daughter to Solomon as king, as wife, well, obviously Solomon or his wife would not want Solomon to attack Egypt, right? Because that's her dad. And vice versa, on the other side, Egypt would not want to attack Solomon because, his daughter is wife to Solomon. So that is how they kind of made peace treaties with each other, giving their daughters to the different kings as wives. And so family ties would hopefully help avoid conflict. But we know that this is not Solomon's first marriage. Because in 1 Kings chapter 14 and verse 21, we read that Solomon's son, Rehoboam, who was the next king after Solomon, came to the throne at the age of 40. Okay? Rather, at the age of 41, excuse me. And Solomon reigned 40 years. Okay, so Solomon reigned 40 years, and his son is 41 at that time. That tells us that Solomon had a son that was 1 year old when he became king. So that means that Pharaoh's daughter was not his first wife. So he was beginning to accumulate wives, which would be the downfall of Solomon. So we see that Solomon's downfall did not begin at the end of his reign, but rather it started right from the beginning. But it wasn't very apparent right away. It became more apparent as time went on. You know, Satan will oftentimes, he will not be able to veer you off, like way off the road right away. So what he's going to do is just going to turn the steering wheel just a little bit, just slightly. You know, you can drive and you turn the steering wheel just a very little bit. You know, you can still drive a while before you hit the ditch. And that's how Satan does. He will turn you just very slightly, just a little. You know, he'll bring something good into your life, but it's not the best. It's not really what God has in mind, and it will ultimately ditch you. And that is what he does with Solomon. And what sadly, it didn't just affect Solomon, his sin, but because he was a leader, it ultimately affected the generations to come. Sin never just affects you. It affects people around you. Nehemiah rebuked the people because they were marrying pagan wives. They were following Solomon's example. Nehemiah 13 reads, this is what it says, "So I contended with them," that is with the people that were marrying the pagan wives, "and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, 'You shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves.' Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the pagan women caused even him to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against your God by marrying pagan women?" So we see that he mentions Solomon. He uses Solomon as an example, as an illustration. And it's possible that these people were using Solomon as an excuse. Oh yes, he was a beloved king, and he had pagan wives, so why can't we? Well, it wasn't God's plan. It was a sin. It wasn't the way God had intended it. Verse 2. So it says, "Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places, because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father, and his father David, except," and that's the bad word there, "except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places." It was allowed, before the temple was built, to sacrifice on high places. It wasn't a sin. You could do that. We see that it was common practice. It was carried on for a long, long time. That people, prophets, when they would go and sacrifice, they would go up on a mountain, on a high place. We see, for example, Abraham, way back. He went to Mount Moriah, where ultimately Solomon would build a temple to sacrifice. So it was common practice to go on a high hill. And so it was okay before the temple was made. After that, it was no longer okay. But before, so the temple at this point has not been built. So Solomon, it says here that he loved the Lord. He also sacrificed. But it says here, interestingly, except that he sacrificed burned incense on high places. Now it could be that he was already at early age beginning to sacrifice to pagan gods. But I feel that maybe that's not entirely why it says except. But maybe it's because Solomon lived a double life. He loved the Lord. he sacrificed to the Lord on high places, except or that he also loved women. He loved God, but he also loved women. And so it says in 1 Kings 11, but King Solomon loved many foreign women. See, he loved God, but he loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, the Hittites, and from the nations of whom the Lord has said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. And Solomon, it says here, notice this, clung to these women in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. You know, if you have 1,000 wives, it may take a long time to talk with him, take him out for lunch, wouldn't it? It'd be a long time. But you know, there's a sad thing, and that is Solomon, he never knew the love of one woman. He never understood the love of one woman. He missed that. And so I think it was a mess, really. But these women ultimately turned his heart away from the Lord. You know, the Bible says that we cannot serve two masters. Like for Solomon, he tried. He tried the Lord and he tried to serve women both at the same time. Didn't work. Ultimately he began to serve his women. And that is how it is with us. If we try to serve two masters, you can't. You either love one or hate the other. And so for Solomon, he began to veer in the wrong direction. He began to serve the women, and his life became very empty, very vain. He felt hopeless and helpless. He felt his life was empty. He was depressed. He tried to get drunk, see if that would work. Didn't work. And he had tried everything. He tried women. He tried getting drunk. Then he tried luxury, see if that would work. It didn't bring any happiness. Nothing worked. He tried music. That didn't work. And you read all of that. And he says it's just all vain. It's empty. There's nothing. He found out that apart from Jesus Christ, there is no fulfillment. Everything that a man seeks, everything that a man needs is found in one person, and that is in the person of Jesus Christ. So verse 4, it says, now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask, what shall I give you? And Solomon said, you have shown great mercy to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in truth and righteousness and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? You know, Solomon had this one positive thing going for him, and that is that it seems that he was a very humble man. He was a man that was approachable. And he admitted that he was inexperienced and that he was unqualified. He said, I'm just a child. Solomon, he was 20 years old. He was a young dude. And the population of Israel at that point was about 4 million, about double of what it was when they entered the land. So at that young age, it could have been easy to be puffed up and say, man, I'm 20 years old and I'm the king. He didn't do that. He realized his responsibility. And he was a humble man. He asked the Lord for wisdom. And so when he goes to sacrifice to Gibeon, the Lord asks him in a dream, what shall I give you? And ask anything that you want. And I wonder, today, if a 20-year-old would actually have that, request from the Lord, ask anything that you want, what would they ask for? But Solomon, he asks for wisdom and an understanding heart in order to judge the people fairly and rightly. I believe that wisdom and understanding is often a rare commodity because people vie for showy gifts. They want, things like prophecy or tongues or some public gift, maybe, doing worship or teaching or something that's showy. But they forget to ask for wisdom and understanding, and that is what is so necessary so oftentimes. And so Solomon, he could have asked for wisdom and understanding in a selfish way, but he didn't. He asked for wisdom and understanding so that he could serve and reign better. And so God honored that because, I believe that God cares for people. I know he does. He looks at people with compassion. And when people ask for wisdom and understanding so that they can better govern people, so that they can better lead people, he honors that. He loves that. And he was honored by Solomon's request. And so verse 14, or rather verse 10, it says, the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for long life for yourself, nor have asked for riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall anyone like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. And so if you walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. So Solomon's request pleases the Lord, because he did not, he asked for wisdom and not for riches. And God says, you know what, I'll give both to you. I'll throw in riches as well. And if you walk in my statutes, I'll throw in long life as well. And so in the next couple of verses here, the remainder of the chapter, we see that wisdom on display. How that worked out for Solomon. Verse 16, now two women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened the third day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth, and we were together. No one was with us in the house except the two of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side, while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I examined him in the morning, indeed he was not my son whom I had born. And so, again, we see Solomon's humility in that he would even hear the harlots, that he would even allow them to come into his temple and his palace, really, and to, he was building at that point, it wasn't finished, but that he would even allow them to come into his presence. So, but he did. And we know the story here that two of them had babies, and one was suffocated and so forth, and the other one, now claimed that it was hers and so forth. So how is he going to divide them? How is he going to find out whose child it really is? They both claim now that the child that is alive is theirs. And seemingly it's a complicated problem, right? Because, you couldn't check the DNA back then. So how do you really know? Well, again, this is where wisdom comes in. This is, Solomon had the right idea how to do this. In verse 24, then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, For she yearned with compassion for her son, and she said, "O my Lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him." But the other said, "Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him." Well, that is very simple, right? Here you know who's the mother. She doesn't want her child to die, even if it means giving it to the other woman, but by no means can she stand seeing her child divided in half. So, for me, it's almost like, man, supposed to head cut the baby in half before Solomon could tell him not to do it. But it says here that they told him, "Bring me a sword." So maybe he was holding the sword, so, making sure no one would take the sword and actually cut the baby in half before he could actually, find out who was really the child. So, understanding. It's what is necessary. So oftentimes, wisdom is what we so badly need sometimes to discern what is right and what is wrong, or what are the true motives of people, or why are they doing what they're doing. We need that. And so I think we should ask the Lord more often for wisdom and understanding. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 4, it says, "Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you." Wisdom is a principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. She will place on your head an ornament of grace. A crown of glory she will deliver to you. And then Proverbs 24 says, of wisdom, it says this way, "Through the wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. A wise man is strong. Yes, a man of knowledge increases strength. For by wise counsel you will wage your own war, and in a multitude of counselors there is safety." So, wisdom. We need to make sure that we have that, and that we get that, and that we accumulate that. Verse 28, it says, "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice." So the wisdom that Solomon acquired was probably through study. It was probably through observations, through experience. But I do believe that the wisdom that he had also came supernaturally. God just gave him a little bit more wisdom. He just downloaded a little bit more to his brain, and he just had it when he needed it. There's a legend, and there are a lot of legends. If you read them, the old Jewish, people all came with all these legends. But anyway, they came up with that Satan at one point came to Solomon and showed him a double-headed man. And the double-headed man married, and he had 7 sons. One of the 7 sons also was double-headed. And one day the old man died, and the 7 sons remained. So they divided the inheritance among them. And the double-headed son said that he deserved a double portion because, he was 2 people. He had 2 heads. And so they brought the problem to Solomon. They said, "There's a problem. How are we going to do this?" So Solomon took a bowl of hot water, and he poured it on the double-headed man and poured it on one of his heads, one head. And the guy began to scream, and both heads screamed. And he said, "You're just one man. Because when I pour hot water on one head, both scream. So you're not 2 men, you're just one. So you deserve just 1 portion, not double portion." So anyway, but interesting. So he was wise, and we need wisdom in order to rule and to govern really our homes, at home or the church or wherever we are. We need wisdom, and so we need to ask God for wisdom. We'll just jump into chapter 4 for just a couple minutes, and we'll close with that. It says in verse 1, "So King Solomon was king over all Israel, and these were his officials: Azariah, the son of Zadok, the priest." And it goes on down the list, mentioning all these people that were in his kingdom. All the way down to verse 19, actually, we see this list. "And so Solomon was a great leader, and he wisely selected, trained, and empowered leaders around him." You know, Solomon's government, when we look at how it was structured, it's structured much like the governments of today. And I sometimes wonder, like, how did the governments really come to be? And we see Solomon already, really, the structure of Solomon's, government is very much the way we see governments today. And also, when we read of how everything was in Solomon's government, we see that he was very organized. Everything was just, very organized. So, verse 20, it says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. See, that's what happens when you have a household that is run with wisdom and understanding. There is rejoicing. Proverbs actually confirms that. Verse 21, so Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. And so Solomon had peace because of his father David. And then in verse 22, it says, now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cors of fine flour, 60 cors of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelle, rosebucks, and fatted fowls. So that was his daily need for his household and his royal court, and that is a lot of food. That would be about 30 55-gallon drums of flour every day, and 60 55-gallon drums of meal. It's basically it's ground grain of some sort. And then it says here he had 10 oxen, or rather 10 fatted oxen. So that was like feedlot oxen. Those are the oxen that he was feeding grain. So I guess, that was for Solomon to have some steaks at night, out in the grill. And then it says he had 20 oxen from the pasture. So I guess that he used that for ground beef so that he could make some patties and stuff. So, and then he had, 100 sheep and the gazelle. And it's an insane amount of food. Now, one of the commentaries I read was that was from 15,000. It could feed from 15 to 30,000 people. And just, as a company where I work, we sometimes make food. And when I know about what amount of food is used per person, I would say it feeds at least 30,000 people a day. So it's a lot of people that worked for Solomon. So for you to have those amount of people effectively working for you, there needs to be wisdom and there needs to be organization. There needs to be a certain amount of infrastructure, so to speak, within that royal court house for it to even work. So he needs wisdom for that. Verse 26, it says, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Now, that's a little bit sad because it shows that Solomon did not take seriously Deuteronomy chapter 17, where it says that a king should not multiply horses for himself. And we see that he did not heed that command, but he did do that. Verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding, and largeness of heart like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Israelite and Heman. These two men wrote Psalms, I believe 88 and Psalms 87. Solomon's wisdom exceeded these men. It's wisdom. Verse 32, he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. I could imagine a person penning 1,000 songs. I think that, that could be doable, but 3,000 proverbs. If I would tell you to come up with one proverb over the next 2 weeks, you think you'd pull that one off? It is hard. Come up with a proverb. It's hard. And this guy came up with 3,000. So this guy was wise. And we have some of them in the book of Proverbs. So we know that he became known for his wisdom. Verse 34, and the man of all nations, from all the kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Father, we thank you for your word this evening. And as we see that Solomon was indeed a very wise king, but we see that he did not always heed his own wisdom. It seems that sometimes his flesh had a stronger pull on him than his intellect, knowing what was right and wrong. He knew some of these things were not right, what he was doing, but he was still doing them. He was not doing as well as he knew. He knew. And so we just pray, Lord, that we would increasingly become wiser with understanding, because we long for that. We desire more wisdom in our homes and the way we deal with our children and wherever we are. We need more wisdom. We need more understanding. But I pray, Lord, that you would also give us a genuine heart of humility and just a longing for the Lord, a spiritual life, so that we would not just have wisdom, but that also we would have spirituality in our lives. And so that we would just balance that out. We just pray, Lord, that you would give that to us. In Jesus' name.